My name is Marin Cole. I'm 34, a home health nurse, and the morning after the earthquake swallowed my apartment, my mother stood in her own doorway, a doorway I'd carried a key to for 18 years, and told me there was no room for my 8-year-old daughter. Not we're full, not give us a few days. She looked at Ren, then at me, and said only, without the child. I didn't argue. I didn't beg on her welcome mat. I said, understood, and walked my daughter back to the car. Here's what nobody in that house knew. I had spent 18 years making myself indispensable to it. The gutters, the tax forms, the pill organizer refilled every Sunday like clockwork. What I did in the 72 hours that followed made my mother stand in her own kitchen at 2 in the morning, pressing that same brass key into my palm, begging me to take it back. What happened on the third night, after the ground cracked open a second time, I'm still not sure any of us walked away from it whole. Welcome to the channel, where people pushed to the margins of their own families finally tell it straight. If you know what it's like to stand your ground with the people who share your blood, drop a word in the comments. This one begins with a locked door and ends with a key nobody wants to touch. The quake hit on a Tuesday, 20 past 4, the last week of September. I was mid-dressing change on a patient's leg wound when the floor rolled beneath my knees like the deck of a boat catching a wake. A 6.4, they told us later. In a town the size of Briar Hollow, that number isn't abstract. It means every plate you own is now on the kitchen floor. I taped the dressing, told my patient to stay seated, and drove straight to Briar Hollow Elementary with hands steadier than they had any right to be. Panic is a luxury reserved for people who aren't the ones holding the gauze. Ren was on the soccer field with her class, clutching her backpack. When she saw me, she didn't run, she walked fast, chin lifted, the way she walks when she's decided not to let me see her scared. 8 years old, already managing my feelings for me. We drove to our building on Alder Street and stood on the sidewalk, craning our necks up. The structure was still standing, but the wall wasn't right. A crack ran from the second-floor window straight down through the brick like a signature nobody asked for. Our unit was on that floor. A firefighter waved everyone back and said nobody was sleeping inside that night. So we slept in the car, Ren curled in the back seat under my work jacket, her shoebox of collected stones tucked against her side like a stuffed animal. I sat up front and did the thing I do during hard shifts. Triage, airway, breathing, shelter. We were alive. We were together. And in the morning, an inspector would walk up with a roll of colored tags, and whichever color he pulled would decide our entire year. The tag was red, the building can kill you, which means 15 minutes inside with an escort and a flashlight to grab whatever you can carry. I've spent my career packing for emergencies, so I didn't waste a second frozen in the hallway. I grabbed Ren's stone box, her school clothes, my scrubs, our documents, the framed photo of her at the beach at age 2. The inspector told me I was calmer than most. I told him to give it time. Then I sat in the car and started calling. 11 motels between Briar Hollow and the highway, 11 versions of the same sentence, fully booked. Utility crews, insurance adjusters, 1,200 families with tags on their doors just like mine. Federal hotel assistance takes days to activate after a declaration. My coworker Priya had a couch, but a yellow tag, a mother-in-law, and 3 dogs in a 2-bedroom. I kept my voice light for Ren's sake and worked down my list the way I'd work a chart. Nothing. The sun started dropping. The gym at Briar Hollow High opened as a Red Cross shelter, and I felt the word arriving before my daughter said it, the way you feel a fever coming on in a patient's eyes before the thermometer confirms it. Ren leaned between the front seats and asked, "Are we going to Grandma's?" Simple question, 2 miles east, 4 bedrooms, a porch swing, a woman who irons her dish towels. Something in my chest cinched tight like a suture because the honest answer was more complicated than any 8-year-old should have to untangle. My parents' house had come through the quake the way my mother comes through everything, undented, certain of itself. Walton Diane Cole, chimney straight, windows intact, the flag out front barely tilted. I pulled into the driveway I'd learned to ride a bike on, and for 1 weak second I let myself picture it. Ren in my old bedroom, pancakes in the morning, a door that locked between my daughter and the cold outside. I knocked. My mother answered in her good cardigan because even mid-disaster, Diane Cole dresses for whoever might be watching. Her eyes went to Ren. First, I watched it happen, the flick, the assessment, something closing behind her face like a shop pulling down its shutters. Then she looked at me. "Marin, thank goodness you're all right." I explained the red tag that we needed somewhere for a while. My mother glanced back at all that empty space behind her and said, in the same tone she uses to turn down a second helping, "You can have your old room, just not the child. There's no space for her." No space for her. In a 4-bedroom house with a sewing room nobody had touched in a decade. Behind her, at the end of the hall, my father stood half in shadow with a dish towel in his hands, looking at me, and said nothing at all. My daughter was 10 feet away, watching through the windshield, reading lips the way kids read everything we think we've hidden. I didn't beg. Begging is for a version of me that still believed this door had a price I hadn't yet paid. I said, "Understood," walked back to the car on steady legs, buckled my seatbelt like it was any other Tuesday, and pulled out. Wren stayed quiet until the stop sign at the end of the street. Then, small-voiced, she asked, "Mommy, what did Grandma mean?" Here's what my mother meant, and it didn't start that afternoon. Wren was born 8 years earlier at Mercy General. Her father had been gone since the 5th month, a good laugh and a bad habit of leaving, a wound I've made peace with. My parents never did. It wasn't him they held against me. It was the paperwork. No ring, no wedding, no tidy story my mother could recite at church without lowering her voice. She came to the hospital exactly once, stood on the far side of the nursery glass for the length of one long breath, and never asked to hold her. After that, the rules arrived quietly, never announced, just enforced. Sunday dinner, standing invitation, 1 chair. Come alone, sweetheart, it's simpler. Holiday cards addressed to me, singular. 8 birthdays, not one gift with my daughter's name on it, though my mother never forgot mine. It wasn't rage. Rage would have been easier to fight. It was policy, smooth, polite, unanimous, enforced through nothing louder than silence. So no, the doorstep didn't shock me. The earthquake just found the crack that was already there and dragged it out where the whole street could see it. What I still couldn't explain was why, after 8 years of one-chair invitations, I kept showing up at that house with my toolbox anyway. Here's the part I'm not proud of. For 8 years I'd been that house's unpaid maintenance plan, climbing the ladder for the gutters, doing my father's taxes at their table while I paid a sitter myself, sorting my mother's heart medication every month because that's what nurse daughters do. In my sock drawer, in an envelope labeled roof, sat $4,800, $3 years of skipped haircuts and picked up shifts, saved because their shingles were curling and my father wouldn't spend the money. Nobody asked me to do any of it. Some part of me believed that if I stayed useful long enough, the debt would come due in my favor, that one Sunday, there'd simply be 2 chairs at the table. My patient Opal Reyes saw the truth before I did. 71, a widow with a 12-acre spread north of town, whose vitals I'd checked 3 evenings a week for 3 years. Twice she'd offered me the empty apartment above her garage. Twice I'd said no, smiling, using Wren as my excuse. Better to stay close to my folks. That refusal turned out to be the most expensive sentence I've ever spoken. The shelter smelled like floor wax and burnt coffee. Green cots in rows beneath the basketball banners, 100-some people trying to be polite about each other's snoring. Wren claimed a cot against the wall and lined her stones up on the pillow, smallest to largest, her own private version of triage. I found the volunteer table and put my hands to work, because sitting still with my own thoughts felt more dangerous that night than any aftershock. Around 9, Nadine Ferris came through pushing a cart of donated blankets. The pastor's wife, kind-eyed, the sort of woman who knows every family's casserole dish on site. She spotted Wren's cot, then me, and did a quiet piece of arithmetic she was too polite to say out loud. Marin Cole. Aren't Walt and Diane just 2 miles out on Aspen? They are, I said, and offered nothing further. Nadine patted my arm and moved on, but I felt something click into motion, the small gears of a town where who sleeps where after a disaster becomes public record. I didn't sleep that first night. Around midnight I turned my keyring over under the exit sign light, work key, car key, a mailbox key for a condemned building and the brass one, worn smooth at the shoulder, to my parents' house, on my ring since I was 16. I'd used it 1,000 times, almost never for myself. Watered their plants while they traveled. Dropped off soup during my father's shingles. Fixed their disposal last spry. NG while they sat in church, so my mother could come home to a working sink, and no obligation to say thank you. 18 years of that key, and my daughter had never once slept behind the door it opened. I thought about the promise I'd made her on the day she was born, in a room with an empty visitor's chair. She will never feel like a guest in her own family. I had kept that promise everywhere except the one place it mattered most, and the earthquake had just put the failure in writing. So in the dark, I opened the envelope marked roof and counted it by touch. $4,800, saved to hold their house together. In the morning, I made 2 calls. My mother would hear about the first within the hour. She wouldn't understand the size of the second until the third night, the night that ended everything. The quiet call came first at 7 a.m. Opal, is the apartment still empty? A pause, then that dry, sandpaper voice. Been empty 2 years, you finally asking. I was finally asking. First month, last month, deposit, the whole envelope, handed over complete, plus her evening care off the clock. Opal said she'd have taken less. I told her that's exactly why it needed to be the full amount. She laughed like a screen door swinging and told me the spare key would be under the geranium pot, which in Opal speak means welcome home. The second call went to my supervisor, requesting my banked leave. By 8:30, the machinery I'd felt clicking the night before had already turned once. Nadine, doing shelter intake, had mentioned to the prayer chain, kindly, the way knives are sometimes kind, that poor Marin Cole and her little girl had spent the night on cots. And the prayer chain runs straight through my mother's kitchen. When I picked Ren up, she asked where we were going. I knelt to her level and told her the truth. We're going to a farm, we're renting our own place. She studied me, because Grandma has no space. I said the sentence I want carved on my headstone one day. Baby, we don't beg for rooms, we build them. She turned that over the way she turns a new stone, testing its weight, then nodded and went back to her box. I heard about my mother's mourning secondhand, from my cousin Renata, who still attends First Baptist and narrates church gossip like a sportscaster. Nadine had called my mother out of Christian concern. Diane, I saw Marin and the baby at the shelter last night. Is everything all right? My mother, who irons her dish towels, didn't miss a beat. Oh, the girls are fine. Marin has plenty of options, it's practically camping over there. Camping? My daughter, asleep on a canvas cot under a scoreboard, a short walk from her grandmother's untouched sewing room. Renata asked if she should say something. I told her no, because this is the part people get wrong about women like my mother. I didn't need to fight her in public. Her whole life was a performance staged for an audience I no longer belonged to, and that kind of performance doesn't need an enemy to collapse. It just needs time, and one witness with working eyes. Nadine had working eyes. Lies in a town like Briar Hollow are like cracks in a load-bearing wall. You can paint over them, but the building always knows, and the building always tells. The city gave me my second 15-minute escort that afternoon. Neighbors showed up in pickup trucks without being asked. Mr. Alvarez from the corner deli carried Ren's mattress on his back like it weighed nothing. Priya came on her lunch break and packed my kitchen at speed. 15 minutes isn't much of a life, but the parts that matter still fit in a truck bed. We were loading the last boxes when I saw the blue pickup, my father's truck, coming down Alder Street slower than I'd ever seen him drive anything. He didn't stop. He slowed just enough for me to see his hands gripping the wheel like it owed him money, his eyes traveling over the mattress, the boxes, his granddaughter holding a lamp. Then he lifted 2 fingers off the wheel in that old farmer's wave and drove on. My father waved like a man apologizing through glass. Ren waved back because she's 8 and generous and doesn't yet know a wave can double as a coward's signature. I filed it away, the slowing, the grip, the failure to stop, the way I file a symptom that hasn't declared itself yet. Whatever it was, I thought, it would take a bigger shake to bring it down. Our second night was meant to be our last. The gas company couldn't relight the farmhouse pilot until morning, quake protocol, no exceptions. It was also the night Ren spiked a fever, nothing severe, the low-simmering kind kids run when their world has shifted twice in 3 days. The shelter's volunteer nurse had gone home sick, so I worked 2 jobs, cool cloths for my daughter, blood pressure checks for half the seniors in the building. Around 1, wringing out a washcloth, I heard my mother's voice arrive uninvited, clear as a church bell. There's no space for he. R. The woman on the next cot had been watching me, small, white-haired, sharp-eyed, one of Opal's bridge friends named Ruth. She nodded toward Ren. You're the Cole girl, the nurse. I was, I said. Your Aunt Faye used to sew all my church dresses, she said, easy as commenting on the weather. Beautiful hands. Shame what that family did to her. Everything in me went still. I don't have an Aunt Faye. 34 years in this town, every holiday, every photo album, and there had never been a Faye in any of it. Ruth saw something shift in my face and closed up like a coin purse. I checked Wren's forehead, cooler now, and lay back down with my mind running hotter than my daughter's fever. I called my mother in the morning from the parking lot, first conversation since her doorstep. Mom, who's Faye? The silence had texture like a room where something just broke. Then her voice came back with the shutters pulled all the way down. Where did you hear that name? Not who told you. Not that's a sad old story. The way you'd ask about a contamination. I told her a woman at the shelter had mentioned it. My mother said, we don't talk about that. With a period on it you could hear land. Then she pivoted, smooth as a hostess. Nadine tells me you found somewhere to go. I think that's for the best, don't you? For the best? I stood in a parking lot full of donated blankets and nearly laughed. My homeless daughter for the best, but I know when to stop pushing a needle. I said, goodbye, Mom, and hung up carrying 2 new facts. 1. Somewhere out there was a woman named Faye, erased so completely that 34 years of my life had never bumped into her. 2. An old woman at a shelter had called it a shame, not a scandal, and shame in my family only ever flows downhill, onto the women. I already understood the shape of Faye's crime. We moved into the farm apartment that same morning. Knotty pine walls, a window over the sink, 2 bedrooms. When Wren understood the second one was hers alone, she walked its perimeter like a tiny surveyor, then set her stone box on the windowsill dead center, with all the ceremony of a flag being planted. I stood in my own kitchen, mine, rented, earned, no conditions attached, and took out my keyring. The brass key, 18 years worn into it, so familiar my thumb could find it blind. I slid it free. It weighed nothing. It weighed everything. I put it in a plain envelope with one line written on the front, you'll need this more than I will. Opal was driving into town that afternoon and I asked her to put the envelope directly into my mother's hand. Not the mailbox, her hand. Wren wandered in while I was sealing it. Is that Grandma's key? Are we giving it back? We're giving back what was never really ours to begin with, baby. She thought about that the way she thinks about a new stone, then nodded and went back to her windowsill. That first night, I cooked in my own skillet on my own stove. Wren ate 2 bowls and told me the pasture smelled like horses, even though Opal hasn't kept a horse in a decade. Their quiet was a held breath. This was just quiet, crickets, the icebox humming, my daughter's fork against her plate. After she fell asleep under the jacket she now flatly refused to give back, I sat on the porch landing with a cup of tea and did something I hadn't done since the ground first moved. Nothing. What my mother did the moment that key landed in her palm, I could not have predicted with 100 guesses. The ground wasn't finished with any of us yet. Opal gave me the full report that night because she narrates like a woman who's been saving up material. She'd found my mother at the church, running the donation table like a field marshal in a Sunday blouse. This is from your daughter, Opal said, placing the envelope in her hand. My mother smiled the hostess smile, Opal said, until she felt the shape of what was inside. Went the color of my good tablecloth. My mother read the one line, looked up, and the first words out of Diane Cole, with half the hospitality committee in earshot, were not "Is my daughter all right?" They were, "What did she tell you?" Opal doesn't rattle easily. Nothing, Diane, she didn't need to. Family is whoever shows up with a casserole and no conditions. Then she left my mother standing there holding 18 years of brass. It arrived that same night, headlights up the farm road. The church relief van, delivering a cardboard box with my daughter's name across it in my mother's elegant cursive. For Wren, with love, Grandma. Delivered through the church relief system, logged on the donation sheet, blessed in public. Renata called before the van left the lot. Her mother had watched Diane pack that box at the depot table, narrating for the room. My granddaughter and my daughter were displaced, you know. We're doing all we can. All we can. I opened the box while Wren hovered nearby, because a child who has never once received a gift from her grandmother does not hover casually. Inside, a toddler-sized winter coat. Wren wears a girl's 2 summer dresses, wrong season, tags stale from a clearance rack, a preschooler's picture Bible, a stuffed rabbit with one ear crushed flat, donation bin material, not something chosen off a shelf. Not one item would have fit, warmed, or interested the actual child whose name was written on it. The box was never for the child. It was for the donation log, a receipt, purchased in public, proving Diane Cole had done all she could. Wren lifted out the tiny coat, held it against herself, and looked at me with an expression I never want to see again. Not hurt, worse, arithmetic calculating her own size inside her grandmother's imagination. "Grandma thinks I'm still," she said, quiet and factual, "little, she's 8. I packed the box back up with steady hands. The next morning the ground moved again. Saturday, 6:40 a.m., 3 days after my mother's doorstep. The floor kicked sharper this time, meaner. A 5.1, centered east of town. Wren was out of her room and into my arms before the shaking stopped. Then it was over, and the crickets picked right back up like nothing had happened. Farm damage, one cracked window, a shelf of preserves scattered. Then the radio told the rest. The aftershock had thrown its weight east of town, power out, chimneys down, crews already dispatched to Aspen Court. I stood in my dry, upright kitchen, my thumb finding the bare spot on my keyring where a brass key used to hang, rubbing at it once, the way you rub at a phantom limb. I want to be honest about what I felt. Not satisfaction. You can cut a rope and still feel it snap somewhere down in your chest, where the anchor used to sit. My phone buzzed across the counter. "Mom, first call since we don't talk about that." I let it ring twice, then answered. The voice that came through had been stripped straight down to the studs. "Marin, your father fell." I was already moving for my bag while she talked. The story came out in pieces. The shaking, a chunk of chimney brick through the porch roof, my father running for the hallway in the dark, the floor lamp, the fall. "Head blood," she said. "So much blood." I told her scalps bleed like liars, that's their entire job, and heard her breath catch on something close to relief. The aftershock had every ambulance in the county running priority calls, and a conscious 67-year-old with a scalp wound sat hours down that list. Then my mother, Empress of the Casserole Brigade, chairwoman of everything, said the sentence I'd waited 18 years to hear, in circumstances I never would have chosen. I didn't know who else to call. There it was, not I was wrong, not come home, the truth arriving by accident. When the lights go out, the person you call is the person you should have made room for all along. Then the nurse in me took the wheel. Keep him still and keep him talking. I'm on my way. Opal took Wren without needing to be asked twice. "Go, we'll make pancakes." I was halfway down the garage stairs when Wren called after me from the landing, not scared, steady, handing my own sentence back to me like a canteen before a march. "We don't beg for rooms, Mommy. Go help, but come back whole." The 6 miles east told the story of what the aftershock had kept dead traffic lights swinging on their wires, a man in a bathrobe directing traffic with a coffee mug, utility trucks staged in a grocery lot like cavalry. The whole drive, I packed myself the way I do before a hard shift. Gauze, saline, gloves. The other kind of packing is invisible and matters more. I zipped the daughter part of me away where nobody could reach it, and put on the nurse, because the nurse could walk into that house and do her job clean, while the daughter would have stood in the hallway bleeding from wounds nobody else could see. Only one of us was safe inside that house. I turned onto Aspen Court as the sun cleared the rooftops. There it was, the house with no space for my daughter, standing crooked for the first time in its life, front door hanging wide open. My father was down on the hallway floor, a couch cushion under his head, a dish towel pressed to his scalp, the same towel he'd been holding useless in that doorway 3 days earlier, finally given a real job. My mother hovered above him, hands doing that helpless, fluttering thing. The house around them was a stranger to me, no power, drapes half down, a crack running up the stairwell wall, the smell of a refrigerator 2 hours into surrender. I knelt, gloved up, and went to work. Scalp laceration, 4 centimeters, ragged but shallow, bled like a crime scene, the way scalps always do, but the skull underneath was sound. Pupils equal and reactive. He knew his name, the date, the president, and the fact that he was deeply embarrassed, which is actually a solid neurological sign. Left wrist swollen, likely a sprain. I cleaned, closed. And rapped, narrating everything in my flat clinical voice. "This is going to be cold. Squeeze my hand." My parents obeyed me like schoolchildren, because that's the thing nobody warns you about, how completely the power in a room shifts the second you walk in wearing gloves. 67 years old, and he lay still under my hands. When I finished taping the dressing, he looked up, eyes wet. Rough as gravel out there, you still came. The hallway went quiet behind me, my mother, holding her breath, waiting to see which version of me had shown up. The daughter or the nurse? I checked his pupils once more and gave him the honest answer. I'm a nurse, this is what we do. His face did something complicated. And behind me, barely louder than the dying refrigerator, I heard my mother say, 2 hours ago, I didn't think anyone was coming at all. We got my father settled on the couch, splinted and elevated, and my mother did the only thing she knows how to do with her hands when her world is on fire. She made tea. I watched them shake, striking the match, 3 tries before it caught, and said nothing, because some diagnoses you keep to yourself. The kitchen was dim and unfamiliar, the fridge silent and weeping onto the linoleum, casserole dishes already stacked by the sink, because the whole east side of town was checking on the whole east side. Her fortress was melting at room temperature, and for one moment I saw something I'd never once seen at that address, a 63-year-old woman who genuinely did not know what to do next. Then she found her old road again. People have been asking about you at church, you know. Nadine mentioned the shelter. I do hope you haven't been discussing family matters. I just looked at her. I've stood at enough bedsides to know silence outperforms any argument. I let hers hang there until family matters and a bleeding man on the couch stood in the same room together, and her voice ran out of road, and her chin dropped a centimeter. My mother, off script for the first time in 34 years. That's when the knock came. Nadine Ferris, holding a candle and a casserole, looking straight down the hall at me, elbow deep in my father's care. In small-town accounting, 90 seconds in that doorway is a full audit. She took in the splint, the dressing, my gloves, my mother in yesterday's cardigan, and you could watch the ledger reconcile behind her kind eyes, plenty of options, practically camping, set against the visible arithmetic of a daughter doing the work of an emergency room. She said only, "Walt, you're in the best hands in this county," and left. The screen door hadn't finished swinging shut before my mother came apart at the seam I should have seen coming. Not thank God your father's all right. She pressed her fingers to her mouth. Now the whole church is going to know we told you no. I set down the tape, and my mother heard her own sentence out loud, the way you sometimes only hear yourself once someone else goes silent. Her face moved through fear, then landed on something rarer, recognition. I said, level and clinical, okay. I hadn't come to operate on her conscience. The knock that actually mattered wasn't a knock at all. It was a car idling too long at the curb. An old tan sedan, a woman behind the wheel staring at the house the way you'd stare at a dog that bit you decades ago. Silver braid, pressed slacks, 70 or close to it, something in the architecture of her face I recognized, because I'd seen its echo across our breakfast table my whole childhood. She came up the walk slowly. I stepped onto the porch, and she pressed a hand flat to her chest. Lord, you stand just like my mother. That's how I met my aunt, Faye Kessler, who'd heard about the aftershock on the radio and driven 2 hours to look at a house. She hadn't stood inside since 1976, when she was 17 and 6 weeks pregnant, and her own mother set 2 suitcases out on this porch, and the church called it strength. She told me the rest in one flat sentence, the way you hand someone something too heavy to unwrap slowly. 50 years, a whole erased woman. My mother had been 13, watching from the upstairs window, the same window I'd stood at myself as a girl. Faye looked past me down the hall, where my mother had gone still, teacup frozen in her hand. My aunt didn't cross the threshold. She stayed right there on the porch boards and said, quiet but loud enough for the whole house to hear, 50 years ago there was no space for me either. Same doorway, different girl. Down the hall, porcelain clinked, a cup set down carefully with 2 hands. I made my decision right there. Dad needs checks every 2 hours tonight. I'm staying until morning, as his nurse. Faye left before supper. I've seen what I came to see, and it isn't the chimney. The house went down into its first dark night in 50 years of forced order. I did my father's checks at 8, at 10, at midnight, pupils. Grip, orientation, his big electrician's hand squeezing mine on command. Holding on a half-second, past what the exam required, every time. At 2 in the morning, I was at the kitchen table by candlelight, charting his vitals, when the stairs creaked and my mother came down in her robe, carrying the envelope. She sat across from me and laid it flat on the table like evidence, and for a long stretch the only sound was the candle flame. Then she started talking, and it came out like something finally lanced. She'd been 13 the night her sister left, watched it from the upstairs window, the suitcases, the porch light, Faye's coat wrong for the weather. On Sunday, their mother walked into First Baptist with her chin high, and the congregation received her like a war widow. Strong woman. Did what had to be done. They praised her, my mother said, staring into the candle. 20 years I watched them praise her for it. I learned the rules the way I learned scripture, Marin. I thought. Her voice did something I'd never heard it do. I thought if I kept the rules would keep me. I sat very still, the way you sit when a patient finally tells you where it hurts. I understood my mother completely in that moment. But understanding isn't absolution. It's just a better diagnosis. Then she opened the envelope, took out the brass key, and did the one thing I had spent 18 years imagining and 3 days trying to bury. She reached across the table, took my hand, and pressed the key into my palm, folded my fingers shut over it, held them closed with both hands like a woman sealing a promise or a wound. "Come home," she said. "Both of you." I didn't breathe. She kept going, urgent now, words tumbling out. Wren could have her old room, the big one with the window. She'd already spoken to my father about it before the fall, the night the church saw the shelter list. The house is half yours anyway. It was always going to be half of everything. From the dark hallway, my father's voice, thick and certain, the first full sentence he'd offered on his own in 3 days. "She means it, Marin, come home." Understand what was sitting in my hand. Not just brass, the room with the window. Pancake mornings. My daughter finally on the inside of that door. The exact dream I'd been making payments on for 8 years, delivered whole and warm tonight for free. Every version of me that had ever climbed their ladder or filled their pill organizer stood up at once inside my chest and reached for it. My fingers curled around that key so tightly the teeth bit into my palm. Then, out of nowhere, I heard my daughter's voice from the garage stairs. "We don't beg for rooms, Mommy." There was one question left. I opened my hand so the key lay flat on my palm between us, and asked her the only thing that had ever really mattered. Quiet, like checking a pulse. "If the earthquake hadn't cracked your chimney, Mom, if the church hadn't seen us on those cots, would Wren have a room in this house tonight?" The candle ticked. The dead refrigerator dripped into its pan. My mother opened her mouth, and I watched her try. She was searching for the yes, her whole face reaching for it the way a falling woman reaches for a railing, and she could not find it, because Diane Cole does not lie in front of witnesses she can't manage, and there were 3 of them in that room. The silence went 1 second past survivable. Then another. Her eyes filled, her chin came down, and that was the answer, the only honest thing she'd given me since the nursery glass, 34 years of politeness ago. No, without the disaster, no, without the audience, no. The offer in my hand was real. The room, the deed, the pancakes, all of it real. And it had been purchased at 6:40 that morning by a seismic event, countersigned by a church shelter list, notarized by a cracked chimney. Here's what I felt, and I'll give you the truth. Relief. Terrible, clean relief. For 18 years I'd believed there was some price I hadn't found yet, one last chore that would unlock that house. There had never been a price. There had only ever been weather. I closed my hand around the key one last time, feeling every year of it, then set it down between our 2 teacups. "Here's what I can give you," I said, in the voice I use over a hospital bed, low, even load-bearing. "I'll stay until morning. I'll check Dad every 2 hours. When you're sick, I'll come. That's the daughter you raised. She doesn't quit on people." My mother's hands stayed flat on the table, bracketing the key, not touching it. "But my daughter is 8, and she's spent her whole life watching this family decide whether she's a condition to be managed. She is never going to sleep in a house where she was a condition. Not this one, not anyone's." I nodded at the key. "So no, Mom, we're not coming home, we are home." Nobody moved. I'll be straight about the cost, because this channel doesn't sell fairy tale. Saying it out loud hurt worse than the doorstep ever had. On the doorstep, she'd taken something from me. At that table, I gave it up myself, on purpose. There's no version of that which doesn't cost you something. I already knew this night would be retold as the story of the daughter who abandoned her injured father over a grudge, and I wasn't going to correct the record. Correcting records is just begging with extra paperwork. My mother looked at the key, then at me, and asked, barely above a whisper, Is this because of the shelter? Because the church found out? She still couldn't see it. It's because you never once asked her size, Mom. 8 years, you never asked her size. She started to cry, not the pretty kind, the kind that comes up from deep storage. I did not walk around the table and hold her. I'd spent 18 years supplying the comfort in that house, and this grief was hers to sit inside of. There was never enough space, she said into her hands. Your grandmother, the church, this whole town, you don't know what it costs, Marin, to keep a family looking right. There it was, the entire disease, in one sentence. I handed her the cure in one of my own. You never ran out of space, Mom, you ran out of nerve. She flinched like I'd pressed on a bruise because I had. Then the timer in my head went off 2 a.m. checks, and I walked to the couch and clicked my penlight into my father's eyes. Pupils equal, grip strong. He held my hand in the dark and said, almost just breath, I should have said something. 8 years ago on that porch. 3 days ago. Every Sunday in between. I clicked the light off. Yes, you should have. He nodded and didn't let go, and I let him keep holding it. Forgiveness isn't free, but it does accept a down payment. I left at first light, but not before writing a care sheet in my own block print, wound care, splint schedule, warning signs, exactly when to force the emergency room whether he liked it or not, my cell number at the bottom, and beneath it for emergencies, real ones. My mother watched me tape it to the refrigerator. Her eyes were swollen, her cardigan button one hole off, and I didn't fix it for her. The key stayed right there on the table, in the ring of dried candle wax. My mother wouldn't put it back in the drawer because putting it away meant admitting something. My father couldn't pick it up because picking it up meant deciding something. So it sat there in the gray morning light, a house key belonging to no one, in a 4-bedroom house with 2 people and no space, once again. 3 days ago, there was no room for an 8-year-old girl. Now the emptiest address in Briar Hollow has a spare bedroom, a spare deed, and a spare key, and nobody left in it young enough to fill any of them. I drove home to the farm with the sun rising in my mirrors. 6 weeks now. Federal rental assistance came through, and I filed the paperwork the way I chart, complete, on time. Ren's school reopened after 2 weeks of inspections. She rides a bus that picks up at the end of the farm road and has told every child aboard it she lives on a ranch, population 2 horses, which is entirely false, and I've made 0 effort to correct her. My father's wrist came out of the splint at 5 weeks. He's driven out twice since, toolbox both times, no phone call first. First visit, he sat in the truck for 10 minutes while Opal and I watched him through the kitchen window like 2 hens watching a fish decide something. Then he got out, rebuilt the sagging gate on the chicken run without being asked, drank 1 glass of lemonade standing up, said, well, and left. Second visit, he fixed the porch light and let Ren hand him the tools, naming each one out loud, Flathead, Phillips, the little torques. My daughter recited them back like state capitals. He hasn't said the word sorry yet. He's 67, the word might not survive the trip up. But tools are their own kind of language, and he's speaking it as fast as his hands will let him. My mother hasn't come. Church sources report she's admitted nothing, chairs everything, same cardigan armor as ever. Except Renata says that at the October potluck, when someone started a sentence about my situation, Diane Cole got up to refill a pitcher that was already full. Sunday dinners happen at the farm now. Nobody planned it, it simply accreted, the way real families tend to. Opal at the head because it's her farmhouse and her pot roast. Priya and her husband when shifts allow. Ren doing homework between the serving bowls, stones arranged by the napkins. And once a month, a pie and a seamstress's posture. Faye, my aunt, we don't do speeches. She hems Ren's school pants. I check her blood pressure. 2 women, spit out by the same doorway 50 years apart, passing the butter without comment. Opal looked down that table one night and delivered her verdict like she was reading a meter. Family is whoever shows up with a casero. Lewin no conditions attached. Nobody argued with her. Then, the first cold Saturday of November, Ren came pounding up the garage stairs holding a mason jar like it was a moon rock. Someone had left a box on the bottom step. No note, no knock, we'd have heard a knock. Inside, 6 jars of home-canned peaches, and on each lid in beautiful, careful, terrified cursive I've known my entire life. For Ren. Not for Marin and Ren, for Ren. 8 years late, and small enough to fit on a jar lid. I'm sorry, spelled the only way my mother's generation was ever taught how to spell it. I handed the jar to my daughter and let her decide, because that's really the whole point of all of it. Ren studied the lid, studied me, then opened it right there at Sunday dinner and passed it around the table first to Faye. "Grandma makes good peaches," she announced. And that was all. And somehow that was everything. We don't beg for rooms, we build them, we did. Here's the one thing I'd carve over every door I ever own. I spent 18 years trying to earn a place in a house that measured love by whatever the neighbors could see. It took an earthquake to finally teach me that home was never the place with room for you. It's the place where your child is never treated like a condition. That's my story. One earthquake, one key handed back twice, and a farmhouse table with room for anyone who shows up without conditions attached. If someone ever made your child feel like a footnote in their own family, you're not alone, and you were never wrong for walking away. Tell me in the comments what you built after somebody told you there was no space for you.